And I'm just going to continue reading where we left off. All right. So let's go. Welcome back. Part 2. This is part 2 of chapter 3 that we're reading. So it says the Synod of South Carolina and Georgia, December 1834, passed the following resolution. Did I read this already? Oh, no, I didn't. This is another resolution that they passing. Number 1, that it be enjoined upon all the churches and the presbyteries comprising the synod to take order at their earliest meeting to obtain full and correct statistical information on the number of colored persons in actual attendance at our several places of worship and the number of colored members in our several churches, and make a full report to the synod at its next meeting. And for this purpose, that the stated clerk of this synod furnish a copy of this resolution to the stated clerk of each presbytery. So they want to know the numbers on how many of us going to church. We need the numbers. We need the stats. Let's see how many of them we put to sleep. Number 2, that it to be enjoyed on all presbyteries in presenting their annual report to the synod, to report the state of religion in the colored part of their congregation, and also to present a statistical report of the increase of colored members, and that this be the standing rule of synod on this subject. The narrative states that increasing efforts have been made to impart religious instructions to the Negro. The Synod of Mississippi and Alabama, in their narrative, November the 1st, 1834, say another very encouraging circumstance in the situation of our churches is the deep interest which is felt in behalf of our colored population, and the efforts which are made to impart to them religious instruction. All of our ministers feel a deep interest in the instructions of this part of our population, and when prudently conducted, we meet no opposition. A few of us, owing to particular circumstances, have no opportunity of preaching to them separately at stated times, but embrace every favorable opportunity that occurs. Others devote a portion of every Sabbath, others a half of every Sabbath, and 2 of our number preach exclusively to them. During the past, the condition and wants of the colored population have occupied more of our attention than any previous period. And in future, we hope to be more untiring in our efforts to promote their happiness in this life and in which is to come. In their resolutions, this synod enjoyed all under their care directly to make united efforts to provide means for the employment of missionaries to give oral instructions to the colored population on the plantations, with the permission of those persons who they belong. You thinking you belong to God, but they saying you belong to them. Sickening. In this same year, 1834, the Kentucky Union for the Moral and Religious Improvement of the Colored Race was formed, and a circular addressed to their ministers of the gospel in Kentucky by the executive committee of that union, to which the Constitution was appended. It was a union of the several denominations of Christians in the state. The Reverend H. Kavanaugh was president. There were 10 vice presidents selected from different quarters of the state, and an executive committee of 7 members located in Danville, of which Reverend John C. Young was chairman. President Young told me at the General Assembly of 1839 that this union had not accomplished much. The second annual report of the Liberty County Association was published, giving some account to their operation. An essay on the management of slaves, and especially on their religious instructions. Clip this. That one little sentence don't even belong together. How you calling somebody slave and trying to give them religious instructions is baffling AF to me. It's baffling. But carry on, Dr. Sean. It says, an essay on the management of slaves, and especially on their religious instruction. Before read the Agricultural Society of St. John's Collecton, South Carolina by White Marsh B. Seabrook, President, was published to the Society. Mr. Seabrook reviews some former publications on the religious instructions of the Negroes and suggests his own plans and views on the subject. The Right Reverend William Meade, Assistant Bishop of Virginia, published an admirable pastoral letter to the ministers, members, and friends of the Protestant Episcopal Church in the Diocese of Virginia on the duty of affording religious instructions to those in bondage. How you giving religious instructions to those in bondage? The bishop, in his zeal and personal efforts to this subject, demonstrates the sincerity of his published opinions. The Missionary Society of South Carolina Conference reported 5 missionaries to the blacks in North Carolina, 1 the rest in South Carolina, 2,145 members, and 1,503 children under catechetical instructions. Catechetical instructions. The Colored Men's Help, or the Planter's Catechism, Richmond, Virginia, was now published. We back. Yes, we back. Also in the Charleston Observer, biographies of servants mentioned in the scriptures with questions and answers. These admirable sketches were prepared by Miss Horton S. Pratt, then of St. Mary's, Georgia, and now of Tuscaloosa, Alabama. The Reverend Horace S. Pratt, previously to his appointment to the professorship in the Alabama College of Tuscaloosa, and while pastor of the St. Mary's Presbyterian Church, gave much of his attention to the instruction of the Negroes, and prepared at his own expense a comfortable and commodious house of worship for them, which they occupy at the present time. Also, a catechism for colored persons by C.C. Jones, printed in Charleston, 1835. The third annual report of the Liberty County Association was printed and more extensively circulated than the 2 preceding. In the narrative of the state of religion in the Synod of South Carolina and Georgia, it is said, even the religious instruction of our slave population, entirely suspended in some parts of the country through the lamentable interference of abolition fanatics, has proceeded with almost unabated diligence and steadiness of purpose through the length and breadth of our synod. Bishop Bowen of the Diocese of South Carolina prepared at the request of the convention and printed a pastoral letter on the religious instruction of the slave members of the Protestant Episcopal Church in the state of South Carolina, to which he appended scripture lessons for the same. If that don't rub you the wrong way, me and you ain't cousins. We ain't. It's just like, what? All they keep saying religious instructions of the slave, religious instructions of the Negro. Like, y'all just so focused on us so bad. Wanna wrap our brain up in barbed wire. Like, the subject has been presented to the convention by an able report from a committee, and a portion of the report was embodied in Bishop Bowen's letter. The Mission Society of South Carolina Conference reported this year 2,603 members, 1,330 children under catechetical instructions. 1836. The Reverend George W. Freeman, late rector of Christ Church, Raleigh, North Carolina, published 2 discourses on the rights and duties of slaveholders. So let's stop here. So what is going on is they're giving the slaveholders their rights and duties to be over the enslaved people and to give them religious instructions, because overall this helps their whole plan. So once they started building the missions and the churches and converting all these people. In the first 1 or 2 chapters, they mentioned converting. It was all about converting the Negro. Now they're saying missionize the Negro in religious instructions. So these words don't mean nothing. They're just trying to control us. That's all it means. Instructions to control the Negro. They just use religion because that word sounds pretty, I guess. It made them feel less, maybe they don't feel anything. Because there's no way you can feel anything for a group of people when you think that you got them enslaved and you're going to give them some religious instructions and they going to be okay. Y'all remember in the movie, The Color Purple? Educate us. Yes. What's up, Lashida? Y'all remember in the movie Color Purple? All of those slave type movies, they always have a church. And you always see the melanated people going to church. That wasn't by choice. That was by force. They had to read certain books by force. And the whole word catechism means that I instruct you, I tell you what to believe, and you shut the hell up. And you just believe it. And now you'll see a lot of church people, they just believe it. You can't tell them nothing. They don't want to hear it. It's like, oh, no, you're brainwashed. But they don't even see what the brainwashing has been done. It's in the bloodline now. The bloodline brainwashed at this point. The DNA is brainwashed at this point. Not all of us. Because some of us are rare. Some of us are learners. Some of us know, like Frederick Douglass said, knowledge make me unfit to be a slave. It made me unfit for that shit. Because I'm going to read. It might take me a while to get through this lesson. Everybody don't have the attention span to want to know more about themselves and more about what the enemy has done, especially when it comes to religion, because it's a touchy subject. But I know it's one of the main subjects that kept me in bondage mentally. It kept me feeling like depression, anxiety, all of those things come from this, because you know you're being done wrong, but religion that they gave you told you that it's okay for you to suffer. It's okay for you to go through bondage. I'm your master, and the other master is my master who put me over you. So people are so confused, don't know who we are. We believe we're something that we're not. We get religious instructions from people who took everything from us, stole everything from our ancestors, and now we're in a state of shock where we're just doing what they say. Nobody questioning it. I mean, some of us need you on here questioning every damn thing, but a lot of people just going with the flow. They following the news. They don't really care. They just going to church. They think the church always been there. No. The church has not always been there. It was given to you by the colonizer. On purpose. This is all they talk about in their churches is how to colonize you and how to make you follow their command. Not the creator who created us. We do have a creator, but do I think they gave us our creator? Hell no. That's a big H-E-double-L no. There's no way you can get me, my creator, talking about my people like this. There's no way. Anywho, the report of the Liberty County Association was prepared but not published this pair. The operations of the association during the year have been successful. The bishops of M&E Church in the United States, in their letter, replied to the letter from the Wesleyan Methodist Conference, England, held the following language, because they get information from England to control us. It says, quotes, "It may be pertinent to the remarks that the colored population of the southern and southwestern states, there are not less than 70,000 in our church membership, and that in addition to those who are mingled with our white congregations, we have several prosperous missions exclusively for their spiritual benefit, which have been and are still owned of God to the conversion of many precious souls. On the plantations of the South and Southwest, our devoted missionaries are laboring for the salvation of the slaves, catechizing their children and bringing all within their influence as far as possible to saving knowledge of Jesus Christ." And we need hardly add that we shall most gladly avail ourselves as we have ever done, all in the means in our power to promote their best interests, The total number of colored members reported in 1836 climbed to 82,661. But I want to step back because every paragraph rubbing me the wrong way. Because I'm just trying to figure out what the fuck. They said, on the plantations of South and Southwest, our devoted missionaries are laboring for the salvation of the slaves. So you got them in bondage, but you laboring for their salvation? Ain't that don't make sense? And you're saying catechizing their children and bringing all within their influence as far as possible to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. You saying that Jesus Christ is going to save them while they're slaves? Let's carry on, because y'all not making no fucking sense. It says the subject of religious instructions of the Negroes was called up and attended to in the Synod of South Carolina and Georgia both these years, and many Sunday schools for children and adults reported from different presbyteries. It also received attention in all the southern synods. There appeared to be a growing conviction of the duty itself and on the whole as increase of efforts. The instructions of the Negroes in Liberty County by the association was carried forward as usual during the summers of these years, but in consequence of the absence of the missionaries in the winters, no reports were published. The Missionary Society of South Carolina Conference prosecuted its work with encouraging success. In an annual meeting in the town of Columbia, South Carolina, they collected for their missions to the Negroes between $1,200 and $1,500. Bishop Meade collected and published sermons, dialogues, and narratives for servants to be read to them and their families. Oh, okay. They want to give religious instructions to their servants. Yeah, so when I hear about them having a slave Bible and all this and changing the word slave to servants over, they had it over, I don't know how many times, but they changed it to servant in the Bible. King James, when he wrote the King James Bible, who also wrote the Book of Demonology, he changed slave to servant. So all of this stuff is making sense now. It says, the second edition of the Catechism for Colored Persons by C.C. Jones, Savannah T. Peirce, 1837, writes, also, a how many times they gonna say this word? Boy, they really was trying to get us down bad, boy. A catechism to be used by the teachers in the religious instructions of persons of color, etc., prepared in conformity to a resolution of the convention under the direction of Bishop Charleston, the Reverend Gentleman of the Diocese of South Carolina, who united in preparing this catechism, were Dr. Gaston, now Bishop Dr. T. Trappier, and Mr. William H. Barnwell. The following resolution was passed in the Episcopal Convention of South Carolina in 1838. Resolved that it be respectfully recommended to the members of our church who are proprietors of slaves individually and collectively to take measures for the support of clerical missionaries and lay catechists who are members of our church for the religious instructions of their slaves. And again, resolved that it be urged upon the rectors and vestries of the country parishes to exert themselves to obtain the services of such clerical missionaries and lay catechists. 1839-1840. From the reports of Liberty County Association for these years, it appears that a revival of religion commenced toward the close of the summer 1838 among the Negroes and extended very nearly over the whole county and continued for 2 years. The whole number received into the Congregational and Baptist churches on profession of their faith was fully 250. The number of adult and children under catechetical instruction in the Sabbath schools connected with the association and in different churches ranged from 500 to 700. The Missionary Society of South Carolina Conference reported 1839 they had 13 missions, 210 plantations, 19 missionaries, 5,482 church members, 3,769 children catechized. 1840 they had 13 missions, 232 plantations, 19 missionaries, 5,000 members, 3,811 children. Minutes. So they're calculating by the number how many people are selling their soul to religion. It sounds crazy, but that's what's happening. They didn't know though. The Methodists returned in 1840. They had 94,532 colored persons in their connection. That's crazy. The Reverend T. Archibald Presbyterian labored as a missionary to the Negroes in Mississippi for years. And in 1839, after leaving his charge in consequence of the abolition excitement, he received a call to preach to the Negroes in Marengo County, Alabama. The Reverend James Smiley and Reverend William C. Blair, of the same denomination, were and still are, if our late information to be correct, engaged in this good work systemically and constantly in Mississippi. The Reverend James Smiley is characterized as an aged, indefatigable father, and his success in enlightening the Negroes has been very great. A large population of the Negroes in his old church can recite both Willison's and the Westminster Catechism very accurately. The names of many other pastors in the South might be given who have consciously and for a series of years devoted much time to the religious instruction of Negroes connected to their churches. The Reverend James Smiley and Reverend John L. Montgomery were appointed by the Synod of Mississippi 1839 to write and compile a catechism for the instruction of the Negro. The manuscript was presented to Synod in October 1840 and put into the hands of a committee of revision, but it has not yet been published. This is what you call propaganda, guys. When they're writing stuff, publishing it, sending it to each other, and we don't know what they're doing and talking about, but the whole time they're talking about converting you to a Christian. The whole time. Every letter, their religious papers, their religious magazines is all about converting the Negro to a Christian. And some of the Negro will be like, oh, well, it must be good. It sounds good. It sounds like that's a good thing they're finally giving us. No. It's not. It's actually the very opposite. The table of the state of the churches of the Sunbury Baptist Association, Georgia, gives 6 African churches with a total of 3,987 as returned. One of these churches did not return the number of communicants. Of the churches in the table, 5 have an overwhelming majority of colored members. The 3 African churches in Savannah are all connected with this association. So they said, okay, we got them to believe. Now we're going to get them some African churches so they can think they're from Africa versus being Indian now. Like, the kids are being born into this. They're getting all wrapped up into colonized religion. In this appendix to the minutes, it said, the committee to whom was referred Brother Sweat's letter on the subject of a mission among African church report that it is highly important that such a mission should be established and recommended that the subject be turned over to the executive committee with instructions that the brethren engaged in that work during the past year be compensated for their services. Your committee further recommend that Brother Connor be employed as a missionary by the association, provided he devote half his time to the colored people. And again, that the table showing the state of churches may be correct than the present, it is requested that the next meeting of the association, the church clerks will distinguish in their reports between the white and colored members, and that such churches as send no delegates will forward a statement of their conditions. Missions to the colored people are noticed in the annual report of the Missionary Society of M.E. Church in 1840. The report thus speaks, and surely those who devote themselves to the self-sacrificing work of preaching the gospel to these people on the rice and sugar plantations of the South and Southwest are no less deserving the patronage of the Missionary Society than those who labor for the same benevolent object in other portions of the great work. Of these, there are chiefly in the Southern Conferences 12,402 members on the patronage of this society. 1841. The report of the same society for this year refers also to missions to the colored population. So you'll notice they stopped calling us before they were calling us poor creatures in the first chapter. The second chapter, they started calling us Negroes. And now they're calling us the colored population. You can see how the language is changing. In no portion of our work are the missionaries called to endure greater privations or make greater sacrifices of health and life than in those missions among the slaves, many of which are located in the sections of southern country which are proverbial sickly and under the fatal influence of climate with which few white men are capable of enduring even for a single year. And yet, notwithstanding so many valuable missionaries have fallen martyrs to their toils on these missions, year after year there are found others to take their places who fall likewise in their work, ceasing at once to work and live. Nor have our superintendents any difficulty in finding missionaries ready to fill up the ranks which death has thinned in these sections of work. For the love of Christ and the love of the souls of these poor Africans in bonds, constrain our brethren in the itinerant work of the Southern Conferences to exclaim, "Here are we, send us." The Lord be praised for the zeal and success of our brethren in self-denying and self-sacrificing work. The Missionary Society of South Carolina Conference reported this year the missions exclusively to the Negroes, 14, plantations served, 301, members, 6,145, children under catechetical instructions, 3,407, and missionaries, 18. So it's basically telling you each year how they were calculating how many Negro missions that they have just for the Negroes. Because before it was just like the Negroes had to go to the YT church because we didn't know nothing about church. But they forced it. If they had enslaved you, I can't say the T word, but you had a red light, you're in. You get what I'm saying? Those people who have been through that. The plantations, because the masters and the mistresses were instructed in secret to catechize their chattel, you know what I mean? So they're calculating how many children, how many members every year. This is like very strategic work. It reminds me of the Census Bureau where they were going out trying to get all the information on the inhabitants and then using that information to enslave them. And using that information to see how much land they have, who is the chief, who is the cacique, where are they? And then they use that information to control us. So the same thing they're doing back then, they're using all these numbers, seeing how many they have converted so far. Meanwhile, we just flocking. We think this is good. We can meet up, we can praise, we can, sing, we can just pray for freedom. But meanwhile, they behind the scenes setting this whole scene up like a movie where you think you getting freedom, but the whole time they behind the scenes pulling the strings like a puppet master. That's what's going on. You in here praising and thinking that, oh my gosh, they gave us a church. You think they're just being nice? Come on now. Nothing that I've read so far gives me the mindset of somebody who is truly spiritual and just being nice because they got a good, kind heart. What they keep saying is, hey, you own these people, you need to give them religious instructions. What? That whole sentence and mindset don't even make no sense. The report gives an animated and cheering view of the prospects of these missions. The great object of society in them is thus expressed. So to preach this gospel, that it may be believed, and being believed may prove the power of God unto salvation, is the great object, and we repeated the sole object of our ministrations among the blacks. So they saying they had to preach the gospel to us so that it may be believed. And if we believe, then we believe that the power of God is our salvation. And they said that we had to repeat this among the blacks. That's crazy. This object attained, we find the terminus of our anxieties and toils, our preaching and prayers. The total color communicants in the Methodist Connection is given in the minutes of our annual conferences the year 1840 and 1841. Now it's saying by 1840 they got 94,532 members. And then by 1841, y'all, they had 102,158 people converted to religion. I guarantee you, if you have a religious family right now, they came from this time period. This is when they were converted. So that's why there's so many of us Indians believing that we're Christians, because this is the whole plan all along. We started with 0 of us as Christians in the beginning of the book. Now we got over 100,000 of us. And that's just in the Methodist Connection. It said the South Carolina Conference is ahead of all, having 30,481. Next comes the Baltimore Conference, 13,000. Then the Georgia Conference, 9,000. Philly, 8,000. Kentucky. So they were doing it by state by state, seeing how many were converted. In their churches, the whole conversation is how many did we convert. In our churches, we thinking, oh my God, God coming to save our soul. The white people gave us a church. Two totally different perspectives and mindsets going on here. The Sunbury Association reported this year 7 African churches with 4,430 members. From 1, no returns. Adding to this number the returns from the mixed churches of white and black, an estimate of some from which no returns were made. A total of 5,664 colored members is obtained. Appendix B, resolve that the committee be authorized to offer a sum of not exceeding $50 per month for 1 or more ordained ministers to labor among the colored people and destitute churches within the bounds of this association. Bishop Meade of Virginia made a report to the convention of his diocese on the best means of promoting religious instructions of servants. The result of his extended observation and long experience in this department of labor. Bishop Gaston of South Carolina devotes a considerable portion of his address to the convention to the subject of religious instructions of the Negroes. He thus speaks, quote, of that class peculiar to our social system, the colored people. Many are members of our church, as are the masters of a very large of them who are as yet are not converted to the gospel. To make these fellow creatures who share with us the precious redemption which is by Jesus Christ, good Christians, is a purpose of which this church is not and has never been regardless. The interest and efforts in this cause have increased, but the feeling ought to be much deeper and the efforts more extended. Consider the large number who are yet almost, if not entirely, without the restraints, the incentives, the consolations, and the hopes of the gospel. Under the bondage of Satan on the precipice of the second death. I speak more particularly of the smoke of those whose cabin is in sight of our ministers, who live on the same plantation with members of our church. Can nothing, ought not everything that can be done to bring such persons to the knowledge and obedience of Christ? There are 31 parochial reports. In 22 of the 31 churches, there are colored members amounting 869. In 15, there are Sabbath schools for colored children. That's Sunday school, by the way, for colored children. Now, I'm trying to figure out, do the YT children go to the school? Sunday school? Were they going to Sunday school? Were they free? What they're saying is they realized that the masters and the mistresses did not convert to Christianity. They just made their enslaved people go to be converted. So that's what they're talking about. How can the masters and the people who they're, in traffic, how come they are not going to church? So they were trying to even convert the masters because they were saying, hey, your slaves will be more obedient if they see you going and being converted too. But a lot of them were not converting. They were just saying, hey, y'all better go to church. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of evil. If 15, there are Sabbath schools for colored children amounting 1,459 scholars. 8 of the clergy preach on plantations as well as their respective churches and give special attention to their colored congregation. And there are 2 missions to the Negroes embracing 1,400 in the congregation. Children catechized on the plantation. The practice of the Episcopal Church in this diocese cannot be too highly commended to those who are similar faith in the matter referred to, which is the baptism of infants and children of Negroes who are members of the church. Clip that. Clip this. They were baptizing the infants and the children of the members of the church. That was one of their primary goals in chapter 1. They said it's easier to baptize and catechize the children because they're more obedient. They can keep this going for generations, which is exactly what has happened. When God established his visible church on earth, he constituted the infant seed of believers, members of it, and therefore commanded that the sign and seal of his gracious covenant should be applied to them. His church has ever remained the same, the members the same, under the same constitution. Our practice ought to conform to our faith, to the plain teachings of the Word of God. A recurrence to this subject will be necessary when the means and plans for the religious instructions of Negroes come under consideration in the 4th part of this work, and I therefore dismiss it in this place. There were 159 colored children baptized in the churches of the diocese by the parochial reports, Journal of the 52nd Convention. From the 7th annual report of the Liberty County Association for the Religious Instructions of Negroes, it appears that the efforts of the association during the year had been successful. There were 450 children and youth under catechetical instruction and adding 4 schools not immediately under the care of association but conducted by members of it, there were 265 more. They keeping detailed numbers on us, man. 7 Sabbath schools in all were returned and 3 stations for preaching. Congregations during the year full and attentive. General order of the people commendable. Appended to this report is the address to the association by the president, the Reverend Joseph Spry Law, an address which received the cordial and unanimous approbation of the association as one which placed the religious instructions of Negroes in a clear light as the great duty of their owners, as well as of the churches. It was believed by the association that the address was calculated to exert favorable influence wherever it should be circulated in our country, and it was therefore with the consent of the author ordered to be printed. Having now presented such facts and information under each year of this period as I have been able to collect, I shall now give summary, in a very brief one, of the action of ecclesiastical bodies and of what has been done by different denominations of Christians. I know of no action of ecclesiastical bodies on the great subject of the religious instruction of Negroes in the free states, at least of no very prominent action. Although efforts have been made by benevolent individuals and societies for their physical and intellectual and moral improvement in most of the cities and chief towns of the free states, and not without success. Those efforts came into notice about the beginning of the period now under consideration. Children and youth were gathered into weekday and Sabbath schools. So now they putting the children into school during the week and Sunday school. Let me pause here for a second, because in the second paragraph, they mentioned when they didn't want them to do any type of school or go to church, they were just making them work 7 days a week, no pay, just 7 days a week. Then a letter came from England, like a sermon from one of their preachers in England, said, hey, y'all need to get them the day off. I know you're missing labor, but they need to be instructed religiously, because this is going to help you control them more. So they had, the first time they experimented with Sunday school, Sabbath school, they had these kids in school from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. Then they had to go to worship in the regular church. And then they had to go back to Sunday school from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. So you'll see a lot of churches, even the church that I grew up in, they had church all day on Sunday. And that's what it reminded me of, like, wow, they really had us in there all day. So by the time you get out, the next thing for you to do is go to work. You don't have a life. They want to have your life so tied up in the religion and work and having nothing that you don't even have time to think or create. We used to go to church in the morning. Well, Sunday school before church. Then we had church. Then you get out of church. And then you go back to church at night. And sometimes you got revival when you're going all week, 7 days, 14 days. And sometimes you get Wednesday church, Friday church. They started putting the church inside of the week. So you got school, church, work. You stuck in the matrix. And you don't even know it. This is all by design. They telling you this is by design. They're saying children and youth were gathered into weekday and Sabbath schools. This was not in the previous chapters. Improvements were made in their houses for public worship, and some permanent supplies obtained for their pulpits. Distressed families and orphans were sought out and visited and taken care of, and persons out of employment were... Is my phone dying? I can't tell. I can't tell if my phone dying or not. It says, but a small part, however, of the entire population was reached and permanently benefited, as I had occasion to know from personal observation. In 1827 and in 1829 in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. For example, I found them in Providence, Rhode Island, with almost none to care for their souls. With a few respectable exceptions, they inhabited the most castaway, decayed, and debauched parts of the town, and were as deep in poverty, idleness, improvidence, and immorality as can be imagined. I saw 2, 3, and 4, sometimes even more families occupying different rooms and stories in one house. The Negro quarters in Boston, New York, Philadelphia presented pretty much the same features. My observation, repeated again in the spring and summer 1839, convinced me that there was abundant room for the improvement of Negroes of the free states, and moreover that the practical interest among whites in their religious instructions was not remarkable. But to proceed, Dr. Anderson of Boston informed me while on a visit to that city 1839 that the present generation of Negroes who had enjoyed the advantages of education were in advance of those that had preceded them and were getting into respectable employments, and that very considerable efforts had been made on their behalf. The Reverend Samuel S. Jocelyn had been for many years an indefatigable laborer for the moral and religious improvement of Negroes in New Haven. Professor McLean showed me a neat house of worship erected by himself in conjunction with other benevolent individuals for the Negroes in Princeton, New Jersey. There are houses of public worship exclusively for Negroes in all cities of the free states, where their numbers make it an object, and the pulpits are supplied by ministers of their own color, and some of them educated men of highly respectable talents and standing. Sometimes they were supplied by white ministers. There are Sabbath schools for the instructions of children and youth, supported and taught chiefly by white persons. For example, the Portland, Maine, the colored population is about 400. They have one congregational church and an educated colored pastor and a Sabbath school conducted by white teachers. So they were saying, hey, the Sunday schools could not be taught by people who look like you. It had to be a white teacher. Right now, if you go to church, you got a black teacher if you're in a black church. But back then, that was not allowed. You could only have a white teacher. It is not necessary to go into enumeration of the houses of public worship in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and other places. In country towns and villages, the Negroes have seats appropriated to them in the white churches. They are different denominations: Episcopal, Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian. Of late years, the Negroes in the free states have manifested a strong inclination to be independent of the influence and control of the whites, and to create and manage their ecclesiastical establishments in their own way, a very natural inclination, and not to be wondered at nor objected against, provided they are capable of taking care of themselves, which, however, many of their warmest friends not only seriously doubt, but wholly deny. As a specimen of this disposition, I would refer to the session of Richard Allen and his associates in Philadelphia, from the Methodist Church, with secession extended into New York and other states. Of this secession in New York, Dr. Bain thus writes, "It is now 20 years since this secession took place, and the degree of their prosperity may be estimated from the following statement of their number of circuits and stations, preachers, and members, taken from their minutes, 1839. I gotta sip me some water. It's a long chapter, but we almost to the end of this chapter. Very eye-opening chapter, but it's basically saying the same thing over and over and over again. They just worried about what we doing and how we are spending our time, and they want to seal the deal for all the time that you have and make you go to work or church or school. Circuits, 21 preachers, 32 members, 2,608. These circuits and stations are found in the states of New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. In the city of New York, where the secession originated, they have a membership of 1,325, making an increase of 396 in 20 years, which is by no means in a ratio with the increase, while they remain under the care of their white brethren. In the city of Boston, however, their success has been greater in proportion. In 1819, they only had 33. Now in 1839, they have 126. So what you'll see is, in these free states where they were not forcing them to convert to Christianity, a lot of the churches that they had, they did not have a lot of members. Over 20 years, they went from 33 to 126. But in the states where there were plantations, in the states where there were the black codes and the Jim Crows, in the South, you'll find there are a lot of churches and a lot of Christians, because it was mandatory that you have religious instructions. In the North, not so much. As the M.E. Church never derived any temporal emolument from them, so we have sustained no other damage by secession than what may arise from missing opportunities of doing them all the good in our power as their pastors. In the slave states, there have been action in ecclesiastical bodies on the religious instructions of the Negroes. And the value of such action is that it discovers a good disposition on the part of ministers and churches to fulfill the duty of his people. The Episcopal Church has rather taken the lead in making efforts and in keeping an interest in its own bosom. Bishop Meade of Virginia, a long unwearying advocate of this cause, Bishop Ives of North Carolina, Bishop Bowen of South Carolina before his decease, and the present bishop of the state, Dr. Gaston, have each addressed their dioceses on this subject and commended it to the clergy and laity. The subject has been discussed in their conventions, accompanied with some able reports. Many of the clergy devote time to the instruction of the Negroes attached to their congregation and have regular and flourishing Sabbath schools. It is stated as a fact that in the Episcopal churches, generally in the South Carolina, there are Sabbath schools for the Negroes, and some of them large and flourishing. There are several Episcopal missionaries to this people in the state. The churches of Charleston have always been active in the instruction of the Negroes, and the present Bishop, Dr. Gaston, has been long known as the advocate of the work. The late elected Bishop of Georgia, Reverend Stephen Elliott D.D., has brought the subject before his convention in his primary address and urged attention to it with an energy and a zeal which promised great blessing to the Negro connected with the churches of his new and interesting diocese. The Negroes connected with the Episcopal Church have generally been noted for intelligence and fidelity. The Methodists perhaps do not yield an interest and efforts to any domination. For the commencement of their church in the United States, they have paid attention to the Negroes, which have had ample proof in the progress of this sketch. In the slave states, they have, next to the Baptists, the largest number of communicants. The Negroes are brought under the same church regulations as the whites, having class leaders, class meetings, and exhorters. The cases of church discipline are carefully reported and acted upon as the discipline requires. The number of Negro communicants is reported at their conferences, as well as laborers in their behalf. Where it is necessary, traveling preachers are directed to pay attention to them. In the South Carolina Conference, the Missionary Society, already referred to, has a field of operations among the Negroes along the seaboard, from North Carolina to the southern counties of Georgia. The missionaries of this society labor chiefly on the river bottoms and in districts where the Negro population is large and the white population small. And it is understood receive most of their support from the planters themselves, whose plantations they serve. We know of no other missionary society in this denomination so fully devoted to this particular field, but there are Methodist missionaries for the Negroes in Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama, and other slave-holding states. Without doubt, as the Lord has opened wide the door of usefulness to this denomination among the Negroes, it will not fail to exert itself to the utmost. Bishop J.O. Andrew, whose circuit is in the southern states, has taken up the subject in good earnest and is prosecuting it with energy and success. The Baptists have no societies in existence expressly for evangelizing the Negroes, although their association and conventions do from time to time call up the subject and act upon it. There are more Negro communicants and more churches regularly constituted exclusively of Negroes with their own regular houses of public worship and with ordained Negro preachers attached to this denomination than any other denomination in the United States. So what they're saying is they have more Negroes in the Baptists than the other denominations. So the Methodist, the Episcopal, I'm probably saying that wrong, but the Baptists is where they had more Negro communicants. It is difficult to collect the direct efforts of this denomination for the instruction of Negroes, as the reports of association are not easily obtained, they being printed and circulated chiefly within their respective bounds. If investigation was carefully made, it might be found that in many of the associations of this denomination, as much attention is paid to the instruction of the Negroes as the Sunbury Association, Georgia, already referred to. There are missionaries in the destitute settlements who devote a portion of their time to this people. Perhaps in the most of the chief towns in the South, there are houses of public worship erected for the Negroes alone. So they're saying in those Indian towns, in those Niji towns, in those places where they had inhabitants, indigenous, autochthonous, melanated people, they erected churches because they wanted to kill the Indian and save the man. There are 3, for example, in the city of Savannah. A year and 2 since I preached to the Baptist Negroes in Petersburg, Virginia, in their own house of worship, crowded to suffocation. The Presbyterians have had ecclesiastical action within the present period in the synods of Virginia and North Carolina, South Carolina and Georgia, Kentucky, Mississippi, Alabama, and in the presbyteries in all these synods. Some presbyteries have distinguished themselves by the zeal and activity in the instruction of Negroes. It is unnecessary to transcribe the resolutions, reports, and acts of these several bodies. Some have already met the eye of the reader. The latest, most general, and satisfactory returns in our possession were gathered from the statements of members of the General Assembly of 1839 from the slaveholding states at a meeting called by themselves for the purpose of taking in consideration the religious instructions of Negroes and of communicating information and suggesting plans of operation. It will suffice to present the sum of the whole in a few words. They just talk so much about us. They just talk so much about our religious instructions. This just don't make no sense, y'all. Like, I know this is a lot to read, but I have to get through this. Like, it is a must that I understand what was going on. Why they were so invested in converting us to Christianity, to giving us Sunday school, to giving us church in Indian territory. You know, I just wish most people would wake up, but everybody wakes up in their own time. Hopefully this will help at least one person be like, you know what? I can't let the enemy tell me who I am anymore in life. Okay, in the synods of Kentucky, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, West Tennessee, it is the practice of a number of ministers to preach to the Negroes separately once on the Sabbath and during the week. There are also Sabbath schools in some of the churches for the children and adults, and in all the houses of worship with but a few exceptions. A greater and less number of colored members and Negroes form a portion of every Sabbath congregation. In portions of these synods, the abolition excitement checked, and in others materially retarded the work of instruction. In the synods of Alabama and Mississippi, almost all the ministers devote a portion of the Sabbath to the Negroes. There are 2 or 3 missionaries within the bounds of these synods and some flourishing Sabbath schools. Access in many parts of the 2 states may be had to the Negroes of unlimited extent. The abolition incitement injured the cause. It said because they wanted to abolish slavery, this injured the cause that they had to convert us to Christians. That's crazy. So us getting our freedom directly injured their cause and their mission to convert us to their religion to control us more. But something happened where those little children that they were converting this whole time, it's like if you were born into it, you don't see nothing wrong with it. They already had a whole bunch of people converted already, to the point where now it was already moving like a automatic machine. But they wanted all of us. They didn't just want what they had. They wanted millions of us to be converted. But they saying the abolition excitement, the thought of us being free, kind of injured their cause because we're now thinking, dang, we could be free. We don't have to be being controlled by you. Like, what? We already knew that. I mean, we're indigenous, but some of those kids who were born into it didn't know. If you ever watch, I didn't get to finish this show, but it's like Harriet Tubman. They had like a show. This is before I became privy to the knowledge of being indigenous, but they had this little boy on the show. Dang, it's reconnecting. Sorry, YouTube. Every time it gets to like an hour, it starts to trip on us. Hopefully it'll come back. If not, I might have to reconnect it again. I think it's just not working. But anyway, this little boy, this melanated little boy, he was born into slavery. And the master took him from a baby and taught him how to be a snitch. He thought he was pretty much white tea. He didn't even know that he was melanated, but he told on him he was right by the master's side. So that's how a lot of these young children were born into this. And that's all they know. A lot of our grandparents and great grandparents, they were born into this, and all they know is church. So they think this is right. They forget all of the history